So Holly Hughes from Indianola, Washington is a longtime participant. You've been here almost every year since the beginning. Missed 2, pretty good record, 20 years. So come on up and give us a read.
So, as Jay said, I've been swimming back up this river for many years now, and it's really one of the highlights of the year for me. I fished in Southeast Alaska. I was a gill netter on the Mary Maid, and then ran tenders up in Bristol Bay and Kodiak out in the Aleutians for 4 years with my former husband, Dave. And we met John and Doreen back when they were running the Beverly Sioux, when they were gill netting in Southeast before they went up north. And I still remember the day in Wrangell when we were sitting around and talking about doing exactly what Fisher Poets has become. And I just want to have a hand for John Broderick for doing this not just once, but 22 times. And also, while we're applauding I know there's a small army of volunteers that puts this all together. And I also want to just call out my former husband, Dave, who worked all afternoon setting up. So there's lots of people to thank for this, and I'm really grateful to be back here again. So since I'm in John's venue, and I don't know that this has ever happened in 22 years, I'm going to read a little reminiscence, a piece that I wrote. It's an excerpt from a longer piece about wood boats, since we all had wood boats in those days. So I'm going to read a little piece in honor of that time, which still is one of the most memorable times of my life, those years we spent gill netting together. We found each other through our boats, John and Doreen on the Beverly Sioux, Guy and Ann on the Restless, Barney on the Vega, and Dave and me on the Mary Maid. We all owned double enders, no two alike, each with its own spirit that somehow reflected its owners, and we eventually became known as the double-ender fleet. We fished together, ran together, tied up together, barbecued together, rehashed openings, debated alternators, played music, and saved each other a time or two. When we ran together, I loved seeing us all lined up like a V of geese. Since our boats were crafted from the forest, it seemed as though we belonged in the landscape in a way the rest of the fleet never could. It's rare that we know what we have while we're living it. Even so, I knew those days were precious. But one day stands out, reverberating over the seasons like a bell. For the first time, we were all running north together, having at last met up halfway up the British Columbia coast, and we were anchored in Clunugget Inlet. The day was uncharacteristically warm and sunny. We'd gone ashore, hiked up to the lake just above the anchorage, hoping to swim. Emerging from the cool shade of the forest, we could see a small patch of sun on the far shore. We made our way down the muddy trail around the edge of the lake until we were stopped by a small stream and a waterfall where it emptied into the sea. Since Dave had the longest legs, he jumped across the stream, found a log long enough to span it, and heaved it across. One by one, with Dave's help, we each made our way across the moss-slick log to the other side. Last to cross was Jim, Barney's crew member, and just as he was about to step onto shore, his foot slipped. Dave yanked Jim safely onto shore, but threw himself off balance in the process. We all watched Dave as he recovered for a moment, then as if in slow motion began a slow descent like a log toward the waterfall. I'm not sure how I did it, but when Dave bobbed to the surface 15 feet below us, I was there, somehow having made my way down the cliff. He swam to the side, pulled himself out, grinned a little shakily, and we had a long, soggy hug. I don't remember if we all swam or not. I think we did. I don't remember what we had for dinner, but in my memory it was more savory for having survived this too. Together, that fine line we always danced momentarily made visible. The whole evening was steeped in laughter and, if I'm not mistaken, a few banjo tunes too. How could we know that in 5 years, John and Doreen would trade in the Beverly Sioux for a set net site on the Nushagak, Guy and Ann would buy the Packer Burley, Dave and I would split up, and Barney would be gone as our small fleet began to negotiate the larger, mysterious currents of life. Thank you. So speaking of Barney, I'm going to just read a new poem that I wrote for Barney this summer. I was up in Petersburg for the first time after a long time away and ended up at the Fisherman's Memorial, which if you've been in Petersburg, you know that all the names of fishermen who've been lost are all carved on a fence, and then there's benches and places to sit. I was having lunch, and I was thinking about Barney, and I just kind of sat down, just wherever, in a nice sunny spot, and I looked up, and there was Barney's name. So I began this poem. I started writing a letter to Barney. So this is Letter to Barney 30 years later. And I should say that Barney died of AIDS in 1978. It was the early days of the AIDS epidemic, before eventually they did develop a treatment that has since saved many lives. The tenders chug up the narrows, bellies full of coho, blind slough silvers, hatchery fish. The hatchery fish we wondered about back when the wild runs were strong. Now they say those cohos saved the gillnetters. A bust for the seiners, no pinks outside, and the few that showed, undersized. Meanwhile, the trollers still chase the vanishing kings. How much hasn't changed since you left, Barney? Paint still peels like a bad sunburn on the cannery's face. Boats raft out, skiffs tapping the waves, impatient to unload. Cannery workers in oilskins stall on their smoke break. The foreman at the end of the dock in his scurry-splatted cap throws back the last dregs of coffee that smells better than it tastes. How much hasn't changed? Keto's Cave, Hammer and Weekon, Lee's Clothing, the laundromat, where we'd all line up, pockets heavy with quarters, play the dryers like slot machines, loading them up so we could go next door to the bar. How much hasn't changed, Barney? How much has? I remember that summer in the bay when a guy said he ran for 2 days to sell us fish because he'd heard 2 women would catch his lines. Now, women run tenders and buying stations, trollers and seine skiffs, longliners and crabbers, and we're all glad for it. You always seemed to know what was coming round the bend. Someday it'll be different, you'd say, gazing off. Someday we'll all be equal. Yes, I'd say, knowing my life as a woman in this industry then was still easier than yours as a gay man. And I can't help but wonder how different your life would be if you'd lived. For one thing, you'd be alive. Barney, if you were here, we'd go to lunch at Helsa, walk to the new library to check out the poetry, then over to the bar for a drink. You'd break into Patsy Cline, throw your arm over my shoulder like the brother I wish you'd been, like the brother you always will be. I think I have time to just read one I wanted to read from my collection, Sailing by Ravens. This came out in 2014 from University of Alaska Press. And there's a narrative arc that runs through the book, and the imagery is sort of based upon navigation. I fell in love with navigation when we were running tenders, and so it was really fun to have an excuse to read old books on map making and navigation and put this together. So you'll just get a small taste. I think I'm going to read Boxing the Compass. And boxing the compass is the term for naming all the directions of the compass. And the way this book is structured, it's divided into 4 sections, north, south, east, west. And I'm reading from the east section right now, which is the last section in the book. And this is actually a sonnet, but it's not a rhymed sonnet. Compass of my heart, why does your needle skitter so? Tell me where to sail, what arc of earth, what shore to follow. I'd box my heart, compass my way, steer unwavering, not let it out, not let those sirens hold sway, not even a dram of doubt. Would I were sweet Penelope, patient virtue at home, not Odysseus lashed to the mast. That's bravery? Or better, could see clearly as Tiresias. Oh heart, if you would be true, chart me a course that frees me too. How am I doing, you guys? Do I have time for one more, or should I wrap up? Well, you got time. Okay, good. I'll read. A ghazal. I love saying that word. It's an ancient form, a Persian form. Spelled G-H-A-Z-A-L, and it seems like it should be pronounced gazelle. It's such a beautiful word, but it's actually pronounced with kind of a guttural, like the way you say Kala, the Kala gallery, it's ghazal. So it's just 2 lines, couplets, but the end of the last word and the second line of each is the same word, and you'll hear that as the poem goes along. And the other convention about this form is that the poet's name is in the last couplet. So this is True North. Shooting the sun at noon, sailors gain the way. We know the sun is there, don't need sun sights. But stars wheel round above, invisible by day. By night must be cradled in the sextant's sight. Blue Rigel, steady Vega, Aldebaran, that red giant. How to still their wheeling, fix them in your sights. So what is it she wants? To orient by one star, even in daylight, or to keep each star in sight? Lodestone of the heart, magnetic filings all aligned, points true north, not swung by other sights. But life is short, desire long, and longing won't suffice. Hold your course, Holly, just trust your inner sight. Thank you. And I have a very quick announcement to make too. Tomorrow night, I'm going to be reading over in the Kala, and I wanted to let people know, just trying to get the word out, that a dear friend of mine and a wonderful Fisher poet, Sue Sutherland Hansen, passed away this spring. And in honor of her, I'm going to devote my time slot, and her sister Vicki Horton also will. Vicki's reading next. And I just wanted to let people know that tomorrow night at the Kala at 9:15, we'll be getting started. Vicki and I will be reading some of Sue's work, but we also want to encourage and welcome people to come and share their memories of Sue. We also set up a little area at the Gear Shack where we have some pictures of Sue and then a book that you can sign for her family, who I know would really appreciate that. So if you knew Sue, if you heard her read and were touched by her beautiful, as John said, gracious, generous presence, we hope you'll come tomorrow night and maybe write a few words in the memory book as well. Her book, Stars and Strangers, I'm going to be reading a poem from that, and that's available through Finishing Line Press. And if you want more information, feel free to talk to me later on. Thank you.